like little ingenious idea that maybe no one's thought of, and it's fun. It's fun to figure out that stuff and try and make things work. Like, yeah, tech is, it just makes filmmaking fun sometimes. It makes the process more enjoyable because you're not struggling, you're thriving.
It's like I don't want to skip ahead, for 2 podcasts from now, content, but we had a situation in one of my previous short films where we wanted to get a tracking shot on a gimbal, and even saying that 10 years ago would be insane, right? You'd have to get I remember using a Movi M10, I think it was, with a C300. And oh my goodness, it was like you had to do an ancient ritual just to get it balanced. Don't get me started. And then my previous short film, we had I think you had a DJI Ronin 2, or RS.
It was a Ronin 2. It was the really old one that came in the gigantic Peli case.
Yes. So yours is the.
It wasn't the top one. It was like the next one down.
It was what? Yeah. So, and we're talking, it's 2021, right? So not even 2 years ago. It was August 21. And we had a choice between the DJI and then the Zion crane. The Zion crane couldn't take the weight of the pocket.
Yeah.
That's what we're using. And we had so much issues getting that to work and be able to see an image. I was being able to power the camera, we ended up having a BNC cable trailing. It was a nightmare. In the end, it became more of a hassle. And, I would say, I won't say limited us. We had a problem we had to solve. We're like, look, we can make this shot work without it. But if the gimbal was working, I think we would have had a slightly different movie because we would have done a lot more. But fast forward 18 months, you have new gimbals that come out, new wireless tech that comes out for those gimbals. And now we could literally just have it on an RS3 Pro with my camera and just be like, oh, that's what we're using. Okay, pick it up, go, shoot it, come put it down. And that's just 2 years of the technology. So it's rapidly changing. Who knows in 2 years from now the changes will be. But I think just going back and looking about how cameras have changed, I think, looking about the journey we had, it was just the tip of the iceberg. I think at that point we were starting to look into, I think Steven Soderbergh was just saw Che, and there was all this talk about this camera that shoots 4K, no camera, no.
Yeah, it was a high big deal back then.
Capture.
No one had 4K.
It was a massive.
It was like
no one did. I mean, the image is still fast for now. I mean, you can still use the red one now.
There's still selling for a decent amount as well. I've seen them going. Been tempted just because I feel like it's a part of history. It's almost like I'm not really into cars, but I am into cameras. I'd love a garage of just cameras. It'd be amazing.
You need a wheelbarrow just to carry it in your house because that thing will 50 pounds.
It's almost like tubular. It's like it's got a slot together. It looks nuclear almost.
Yeah. So it looks like it's gonna have something like a uranium thing in there, but like a cube of uranium. But the thing about that, it was I went on set in my final year at university, just in a bit of work experience with this short film, with this director from Manchester, James Statham, really nice guy. Shout out James Statham. Hope you're well, bud. And I remember working on the set, and they had a red one. It was a DP. Can I say the DP's name? Yeah, a DP named Phil Wood. Really, really amazing stuff. He was doing amazing stuff. He still does. I think he's working on big films now. And he had a red one. And I remember looking at the image, and because I brought my 5D, and there were some shots where, because he was available one day, that they did some shots in the 5D, and they used me. I didn't shoot it. They focus puller stepped up to the camera operator for that shot, and they got it. They kind of just it was interesting seeing the philosophy of how I shot versus how this experienced camera team shot with my camera. and the results. I think that was a very interesting thing. I'm going to go on that in a second. But when I looked at that image for that red, I knew it had a smaller sensor size. I think it was Super 35 just about. But the image looked way better than what we had got with our 5D. But part of that was, obviously, if we just take for a second, just on the camera, obviously I didn't know what RAW meant. I mean, we knew raw photos meant, and you obviously see the difference between a raw photo and the image just coming out of the compressed H.264 MP4 file that we were getting from the 5Ds. But like there was a difference. But that was, imagine raw pictures in every frame of a 24 or 25 frame, and the image in that, but it just looked better. But then I started to look around the camera, and they were using this big lens. It wasn't a EF mount they were using that we were used to. They're using what would they call a PL mount? Obviously, it's a PL mount, the industry standard. But I'm trying to take you to the mind of, university level Anderson. And you're going, wow, these lenses, and you hold them, they felt so heavy, these Zeiss Super Speeds Mark IIs. But the camera tech obviously is another level, even what we're using. But then also the workflow. There was the DP, obviously. He was his own camera operator, but he had a focus puller and a camera assist. Then they had, we would use sound recorders at uni. They had sound recorders there. They had an AD production manager, but then they also had production designer. I remember the director would shout, you look at the frame and say, "Can I get a bit art department on that?" And I was like, "What's this art department?" And you just see these you will come with like their little arts and crafts and starts like messing things up, and you just look better. Now I know, production designer, that's standard. Art department, you have an art director, art department, props, all this, But at the time, I didn't even know what that was, because, whilst I did a production course, it was more really focused on the producing and making a film, not necessarily all those particular jargons, which I think they've improved on since. But yeah, and it was like the philosophy fascinated me, because it was like, it's not just the camera, it's that they have all these really good people working on set. And it almost became you only really get to use that camera once you have this kind of crew, because a camera, like we joked earlier, it weighed a ton. It weighed a ton. Honestly, people moaning about the weight of a flipping Ursa Mini or even a red Monstro. Oh my gosh. You try and shoot all day on a red one, handheld. It's not happening. You couldn't. You have to have an easy rig. And even then, your lower back's still feeling it. And I think, but image out of it. But again, it wasn't just, it was the care that went into the image, the care that went into crafting each one of those scenes. It was a marriage between the technology and then actually the work.
Yeah, I mean,
the people. Well, it wasn't.
And those cameras, they were designed to be used by more than one person. The Red didn't design a camera with the intention of a single shooter going out and using that camera for documentary work. That camera was a cinema camera and was meant to be used to film, studio-based work, I'm guessing, where you could have, the massive amounts of data it was recording to. Like, us at uni were recording on CFast cards, which I know still they use today, but what were the size of those CFast cards? 16 gigabytes? 32 gigabytes?
Gigs,
and that was like, we would have a few cards on set, but nowhere near the data that you are getting out of cameras now. I mean, my Red now gives you, 40 minutes of RAW on 512 gigabytes? Like...
We had 500. Ironically, I have one of my hard drives from university.
Yeah.
This is a 500 gig hard drive. And this has like all my university films on it. I wonder if it still works. All of that on it. And like, that is just essentially a half a day of shooting.
Yeah. And obviously, if you're generating that amount of footage, you need an entire person to make sure that footage, something we never did at uni, was check the footage, really. We would I guess we would check the clips were there, but we wouldn't compare file sizes, and there certainly wasn't anything like Shotput Pro or any of the programs that you could use today to check that stuff. So footage was always something that was just a last minute thing for us. It was like, dump the footage whenever you get a spare second. We didn't have someone dedicated to making sure the most important thing on the set was actually stored correctly, which is obviously a whole department, basically, on a film set, to just kind of make sure that that footage is being backed up correctly. And storing it to 2 hard drives was something I never even did until years later.
Oh my God.
I was just storing it. I mean, I usually would copy it eventually, maybe, if I had the room. But at uni, I'd lost all of my footage for one of my films because I didn't have it backed up in a separate location. And it's just stuff you don't think about until you get further down the line and you realize, that stuff is important, and that's why there's people dedicated to doing it. But I learned the hard way. And lost a bunch of footage.
Yeah. You can either, you bring up an interesting point there just about the respect of those different roles and understanding that they have to be there for a reason. Now, I know filmmaking is I don't say it's massively different, but it is different. Obviously, there's a different subsector of this industry. There's a bigger low end and mid end than I think there's ever been before. But and I think within that, sometimes there's a combining of roles because the budget's not there. Look, am I not going to make my film that I've been writing for 2 years because my budget doesn't have money for a DIT? Of course not. You're just going to say, look, can we just put those 2 roles together? And you're just hoping that they do a good job. Or if you're like me and you're sane for these things, you still take responsibility and DIT, you're directing and producing. But that's just my head. Not everyone's going to do that, right? But you kind of, you understand why, because it is literally the most important thing on set, that card. Because if it's gone, you've got to redo everything. And I think the thing that is about respecting the process, and I think the thing that I learned from that film, and then when I worked in adverts a couple of years later, it is very much about the process with the technology, the process of the team, respecting it. Yes, it might seem a bit basic, but it's like having a person that's literally dedicated to that one job role, make sure it gets done properly, and then you don't have to think about it because it is happening properly, and I think that's an underrated part of filmmaking. And again, technology is making that easier, because, what we were looking at recording camera to cloud now. Which is insane.
It's insane.
It's
insane that, we said, it's not quite there, but it's like where it's heading. And soon, your footage is going to probably just back up to the edit remotely as you're recording, and an editor will be able to start working on that stuff immediately. We're not far away from that. The Red has that built in to work with Frame.io. I'm sure there's devices out there that you can plug any camera into that will do that. And as we go forward, it's probably going to be built into Premiere in some way and Final Cut.
Yeah.
And, if we're at the point now where 1080p doesn't seem to be a problem to do that kind of stuff, then it's only going to be a few years till RAW is just being backed up to cloud. And yet again, the technology is advanced and it's making it easier for you to cover that job role and make things yourself without having to have a huge budget. And that's where the tech is going to just make it more accessible. Because ultimately, anyone, can go out there and make a film. And I truly do believe that you don't necessarily need any experience sometimes. It's just having something to say and surrounding yourself with people who know what they're doing, and you could come out with something great.
I think, I think that's a great point. I think we've come to a point now where I think the gate is well and truly open. The gatekeepers can't say you need to do this, this, and this, and this before you make your film. I remember her, and I couldn't remember where I heard it from, but I give my advice to any students or people who are looking to break into the industry now. Said, how do you be a director? And I said, you just have to make films. And it's like, oh no, isn't there a set path? No, there isn't. You just need to make a film. Keep making a film. There's no qualification for being a director. You just have to prove it by what you're doing. And sometimes that can seem a little like frustrating because you would love, we all would love a mentor to tell us exactly when to do it, when to make the jump, when to do this, how to do it. But when making films, you just have to keep making them. And then at some point, you're going to get a good shorthand. And the shorthand isn't always about how we move a camera or whatever. Shorthand means a workflow or whatever, or a style. And I think that's fascinating to do, because now filmmaking is so accessible. I mean, would I go to film? Would I have gone to university now for film now, considering all the resources you have? I think I'd have to weigh it up more now, but obviously there's the context.
Yeah.
We have, but it's really interesting. But I think, let's move on a little bit, Bud, because I think it'd be interesting. Obviously we talked a lot about when we're at uni, and just that period. It's that period after uni, I think, was quite interesting for us.
Yeah.
Obviously a lot of stuff happened. And, and obviously there was the idea that, the Red was this apex camera we all wanted to eventually work on. Tell me, obviously this is 2010, so whatever. What would happen?
So it was kind of like we'd used the 5D now for a couple of years, I think, and eventually with any tech, and especially that tech that wasn't intended for that purpose but had been used as it, you start to feel a bit limited by the tech, and you realize that you kind of want to move on to the next step. And the next step then was a cinema camera. There wasn't anything in between a DSLR and a cinema camera. So the only real next step for me was a Red Scarlet, which was like a £15,000 camera, which was the cheapest one you could get. And I took out a loan and put some money that I had towards that camera, just because I wanted to move on. I wanted to expand and learn kind of the next thing, I guess. So I remember getting it, and it was modular camera, and it was quite big, and it came in all these boxes, hard cases, and I couldn't even figure out how to put it together back then. Nothing was assembled. It was bare bones. Don't even think the lens mount was attached. So it was like you had to full on build this camera and put it together. And I was working in Manchester, but my dad had got the delivery at home, and that was Lincolnshire. And after work, I drove 3 hours home to get the camera. And then I got up at 5 a.m. the next day and drove 3 hours back to work the next day. And we tested it. We tested it that night, and it was just something else, wasn't it? It was like, it felt big. It felt like it was a big deal to have that camera, and to just have this thing that had all these new settings. Like I didn't know what project time base was back then. I was like, I know what frame rate is, but what's time base? And I learned from.
That's really being awkward.
All cameras are awkward.
All the time.
No, they all have their own names for things, but a lot of these settings mean the same thing, just in their language. Yeah. So, and it's really, for me, having that and using it and learning with it was just, that's how I learned. And it was a much more difficult camera to use because you had to have that prep. One of the first big films I did on it, and Anderson shot, was a film in London on top of a rooftop, and we had a big crew, and we had camera assist and DIT to deal with the camera. All of a sudden, the amount of kit that you're bringing to these things gets bigger. It no longer fits in a car. It takes a van, because the tripod to hold that big camera needs to be a lot more heavy duty than the one that you have, because you don't want to put a really expensive camera on top of a £500 tripod, because then it's gonna break.
No chance.
And then you've got these lenses now, which I think we rented the CP2s for the
so
6 speeds, yeah.
ZEs.
So then they come in a much bigger box, and now we've got I think we had HMIs, couple of HMIs, two HMIs, which are big beefy lights, because we needed to light outside. And it's like, up until that point, I don't even think we did use lights outside, because the ones at uni weren't powerful enough to do anything in the day. So it basically elevated things to the next level. And I'd left uni then, you'd left uni, and we'd had a bit of experience, I think a year or so in working in various parts of the industry and seeing how different people did it, and then you bring that knowledge to this shoot. And and it goes to show we shot that film in 2011, I think, maybe 12.
12.
The footage looks amazing today. It still holds up, and it still would be reusable, gradable. Perfect. There's nothing out of that camera, and that's where we're at now, I think. I mean, that's where we've got to. We've got to a point where basically everything looks great. Most cameras now are going to look great. They just are, because that's the standard we're at now, where you don't need a red to, and there's a lot more choices in between a red now, and different. It's not just us. It's like the industry that's kind of wised up to what it wants or what it dictates we need, and that's become the Netflix camera hot list, which I don't think is really a good thing. I don't know why Netflix need to dictate. Surely it should be content.
I've heard rumors that there's ex-Red employees that work at Netflix.
Do you know what?
Why?
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't be surprised.
And they're never going to turn down your film if it's good. You could have shot it on an iPhone. They will not turn it down because of that list. Because a camera doesn't dictate a good film, ultimately. So, and we are at the point where, your iPhone looks great, and it's only going to get better and better the more things go on. And, I'm not saying go and use an iPhone and don't get a better camera, but it's like, if you can't get a better camera, then use an iPhone. Don't let it stop you. Get out there and do something. Because
I think he said
no. We'll watch it. These days, people will watch your content. We're way more accepting of everything looks better, but we're also, with the introduction of YouTube and stuff, user-generated content is way more acceptable. People are just way more willing to watch what you make. That it doesn't need to necessarily be big. So
it doesn't need validation. You sometimes make an audience. I mean, right now, I'm literally just finishing 2 films. One that's taken way longer than it should, and the other one we shot last year. I shot that, 2 different kind of films. And as I'm finishing them, yes, I should have come with a festival plan beforehand, blah, blah, blah. They're self-funded, so I can do what I want. But the point is, it's like, should I just put these online? Should I go to the festivals and not let anyone see them for another couple of years, remembering I own all the rights for them? So it's like, well, why am I making it? It's something as a battle I have going on, but you start to look at some of the views that some of the YouTube isn't just, it's not a style of video anymore. People say, make a YouTube video as in a short clip. No, YouTube is a full platform. We have to think of YouTube as not even a TV channel, because everyone has a TV. There's a couple of, there's 500-600 million TV channels on YouTube. YouTube is literally,
it's a network,
a platform.
It's just network.
It's a network. It is a network. And I think, because of these new distribution channels, there's obviously so much more content. Yes, it's brought the price of that content to be made down. It's had to, because there just needs more of it. And, obviously, we could have a separate discussion about the how so much content has brought standards down, which was inevitable. But I think, going back to that time, it was so exciting. I had worked in adverts for a bit. I had worked on Red. I didn't shoot. I was ACing on Red a few times, getting used to the workflow somewhat. And then obviously you got in, we heard about the Red Scarlet, and it was like, whoa, the Red one, but cheaper. And I think it was obviously they're moving on to their DMC2 bodies and stuff that were meant to be the whole modular thing and whatever. And there was a epic weapon, and then there was a Scarlet. Scarlet was a epic dragon and the Scarlet dragon. Because you had the epic.
I didn't. I had the Scarlet. The dragon wasn't a thing and the epic dragon wasn't a thing until after I'd bought it. And then they released an upgrade that you could pay, I think it was $6,000 for, and they would replace the sensor inside of the camera. And they did that. They offered that on both the Scarlet and the Epic, and that's when it became the Epic Dragon. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So again, that was the thing they were advertising that they would be able to do. What you think of, when you look back, that's really, I know we've kind of all soured off Red at one point, but when we actually think about what they did for the industry and what they forced Sony to do, really, I think it was really important, because Sony was never going to give us a user interchangeable sensor. I think they did with the F5 and F55, but that was a bit different.
Yeah.
That was a one-off. They would never make a system where it was completely modular. They would just buy that camera, use it till it falls apart, and then you buy another. You buy the next model up, or they'll make an incremental change, and it's a completely different model. Which I know Sony has a great rep now, because their marketers and strategists are amazing. But it's kind of, rubbish that they kind of hamstring their cameras on purpose. So you have to spend another spread to get the one up from it, when you know there's that camera that can do all the things you need it to do. But again, that's another story for another day. But I think that the thing is, the philosophy that the equipment made us bring on set with using more of that stuff was that we had to approach it more professionally. It was, we did approach it like it was a digital negative. And when I say that phrase, I mean, it was the care and thought, is that scene acted? We blocked it out. We didn't call it blocking then, but, that's obviously what we were doing. Is the lighting right? What time of day is it? Can we run through this again? There was much more than just, let's get the camera, get an explosion and shoot, which, to be honest, that's what we were like, because we didn't know any better. But now as we started to craft this, and again, the technology and seeing that, we've got to rent these bigger things. We got to it's a bigger tripod, bigger support gear. Okay, to actually move the camera, I need more people. Thereby, okay, and once you start getting more people, and yes, there were friends doing favors, whatever, but because there were so many people working on it, you're like, okay, then the idea, we have to make sure this idea is good. We have to make sure we getting the right thing, because I can't ask these people to come back tomorrow, because there is no tomorrow. It's only today with the film. And so that has a quality of, because you're mentally preparing better, because there's all this pressure, the film becomes a much better film in the end of it. It's really interesting, that process. But like you said, it's that, if your films, what motivated us was that our films were starting to look like professional films, which then motivated us because the way they looked got better. We wanted to make the other aspects of the film better, because there was not as much holding us back. The gap between our films and Hollywood films was getting smaller. So it was like, we can do this. We can make stuff that is genuinely cinematic, and people are viewing it in that way, and they're surprised by it and shocked by it, and it motivates you because you're not being held back. And with all this new tech, it means people aren't being held back, which means that they're motivated to make better content. And ultimately, so technology really is just, it's helping you, it's motivating you to want to improve every aspect of the film. That's how I look at it. What would you say? But obviously, then you came to a point. You came to a point where it's like, okay, I've got this equipment now. I've got this camera. I've, technically got it, know how it works. But there's something else I need. I'm not sure what I'm missing. There's something else I need.
Do you know what I...
Did you come up?
Yeah, I think when I got that camera, I was probably not ready for it, but there was nowhere else to go. It was a DSLR or nothing. So you realize that the things that make that camera a great cinema camera, are the things that make it, or made it at the time, a negative do everything camera. It wasn't designed in that way. It wasn't something that I could just take on shoot an interview for a company, because the data I was giving them was 100 and something gigabyte, because there was no other formats built into that camera. It was raw or nothing. And if you could shoot 1080p, but you would crop the sensor, so the image wasn't as nice. So that camera had a very specific use, and the camera that I needed to have a more varied use, and that just wasn't invented yet. And it was only really probably a few years after having the Red that more cameras started. The gap between DSLR and cinema camera was bridged, and Sony started releasing cameras, and Blackmagic started releasing cameras, and you had this big influx of cameras that were designed to be the in-between camera, to bring cinema cameras to the budget filmmaker. And really, that's what my next step should have been. It should have been something like, Blackmagic or something smaller than a cinema camera. But I feel like that's, if you look at Red's lowest cost camera now, it's designed to be an F3 camera. It's not designed to be just a cinema camera, because the industry was still also figuring this out as we were figuring out. So they were figuring out the need at the same time I was figuring out the need. So it just took a little while for it to catch up, really.
And I think the other thing is, obviously, that there's your point about obviously the specific purpose it had versus the do-it-alls. Because you'd argue to this day there's still not a do-it-all camera. We all know what we want out of our own perfect camera.
For sure.
But it was just that usability, but like in terms of it was risky, it was ballsy of me to get it, because it wasn't like you were shooting high-end commercials yet, it was like, this is what I want to do, and it was quite impressive. And you made it work, but I think the thing that, obviously at that time I was working for a company, we sort of talked about Fuzzy Duck, but I think, the company had to make a decision about what camera we would get. And that was a really important thing for me because, it was, once we buy a camera, once the company buys the camera, we're not going to really rent a camera. We're only going to use the camera that we own, or that the DP that we're hiring or the camera operator we're hiring is using. And so that was important for me to make sure that they got the best, because it was like, well, this is the camera I'm going to have access to for the next 5 years, really. And I think, Sony had already started to think the F3 before, but not very many people did it. It was a bit of a weird one. The codec was still a bit because it was 35 megabits per second, sorry. And I think the broadcast standard at the time was 50 megabits. So the fact that they made one with 35, people were like, well, what was the point? Like, you just made like a Super 35 camera that could only use on corporates. You can't use it on TV. So they went back to the drawing board, scrapped it, and then obviously made the F5 and F55. And obviously the FS7, which, as everyone took over the world, even though I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I just thought that camera is the epitome of, and I'm not going to go there, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Where it was the same sensor as the F5, which is what which is what I'd suggested the company gets. For me, that was the best value camera, I think, up to that point ever made, I think. And I know that might sound dramatic, but the fact is we could change mounts. It could shoot everything from 50 MBS, 35 megabits per second in a MXF wrapper, all the way up to, at that point it couldn't do the 4K, so maybe the F55 would have been better, but the F55 could do 4K XAVC, which is the internal codec, which everyone knows now because everyone has flipping A7Ss, FX3s and FX6s, but like the versatility, and then you could crop in the sensor, still have 1080p, you can have two lenses in one lens, but that camera wouldn't have been the right camera to learn on. It was a camera that for me, you had to know what you were shooting first before you, and got used to your workflow first. And obviously that camera, I put it in situations where it was on a commercial, documentary, loads and loads of corporate event stuff. It wasn't too heavy. Really liked it. But the thing it lacked was what the Red had, which is what the raw internal footage. I think you had a recorder you get in the back, the R5, I think it was called, that you put on the back, and you could get raw out of it. But it didn't work. It didn't work in the same way that Reds would.
Yeah.
But like, it was weird because I never saw that as a camera that was exciting to make a film on. I know that's, looking back, that was really stupid. You know, it was a Super 35 sensor, really good, not really jello-y footage, solid, always worked. But I just never got impressed to like, let me go out and make a film on this.
Yeah.
Because I always talking back in my mind, well, you know, one of my best mates has a Red. He always shoots my films. We'll shoot on that. Or, you know, or eventually I'd love to shoot something on Alexa. It was always something, it was weird, and I think, obviously, you look back at your own journey, you think, that was just you going through maturing as a filmmaker, because you're still not mature, because you would have just said it's a camera with a Super 35 sensor that could go to PL mount, has internal NDs, it was freaking, it had everything. Just shoot your darn movie, you know. But you live and you learn, and I think, but like Sony got forced into doing this camera. It got forced because people were putting big lens adapters on the front of their EX3, which the company had over it. These things, they made the camera like that long.
Flip it upside down or something?
Oh my goodness.
It was like, you had to mount the camera upside down.
Just to make it work. It was mental. And so they got forced into doing it. They tried the first time and people didn't like it. And then they tried again. And then it was one of the most two successful cameras. Well, F55 was the most successful one, but it was also twice the price.
Yeah.
That global shutter. So it was interesting. It forced, but again, that was out to the Red and what Canon it did. And it forced everyone in there, and it brought a different look to corporates. Because before, you know, the films can be shot.
Can you look like shot on an EX3?
EX3 with a 70 or 5 B camera. It was like, ugh. You know, and I was working in adverts just before I worked at Fuzzy, and so you're seeing all this stuff on Alexa with Cook Prime.
Yeah.
And then you come and you're like, oh, 7D and the X3. So getting that F5, and it's not the fence. It was, you know, we're talking about commercial versus, you know.
Yeah, of course.
It's not really fair.
No.
To make the comparison, but like then the opportunity to get the F5 came up, got it, and it just, for me, you know, and again, you know, reliability, whatnot. You know, I could sing my praises about that camera. Everyone who knows me knows I go on about it. But, you know, again, it was the point where the industry caught up to what we wanted it to, and it now had just become an everyday tool.
Yeah.
You know, and what is this, 2013, I think we're talking about?
I think so, 2013, yeah, it would have been about. So, yeah, there was the introduction of, still quite expensive though. I think the F5 was like their budget. Was it the F5 one or was it the FS5? Which one was the cheaper one?
So the FS5 was the cheaper one. Like that was for like, hey,
that was a tiny one,
which is nothing wrong with shooting weddings. Yes, nothing wrong with shooting weddings, but it was a wedding video on the camera. Then you had the F5, which was like the 12 grand.
Yeah, so that's getting towards like the Red cost basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like
then you had the F55 at 20, 28, 29, and that was like cinema, whatnot.
And now what have we got? We've got the FX6, which is like their new standard, which is apparently amazing, and that's priced at what, $5.5 grand? So now we've got the camera that's considered kind of not the top end, because they've still got the obvious top ends, but like this is considered, you know, the ones that you would use for Netflix documentaries and stuff like that. And it's priced at $6 grand. So that gives you an idea of where the standard of, like, I guess TV and like documentary and some cinema and stuff has come down in price to have that cinema standard camera. And that is what a lot of people are asking for on jobs like the FX6 and stuff. And before that it was like the FS7. Was it the FS7? The F?
Yeah, FS7.
So it's you can see now that like that price is almost halved to get what is considered to be a good camera, not the B camera, the good camera. So
$6 grand, you couldn't. What could you have gotten in 20? What year are we talking about? 2013 for $6 grand that would do all that.
Maybe when did the C300 come out?
That was even $9 grand. Because I only know this because I did extensive research on the two.
Yeah.
And then the C500, it was still $9 grand. It was still $9 grand. So it didn't exist. This price range that everyone's moaning about. Sorry, not moaning, but you see a lot of discourse about, oh, this needs to be cheaper, this is more expensive, or why doesn't it have this? It's like, oh my word, it's like this used to cost 20 grand for the pretty much the same level of camera, or this equivalent level, 20 grand. And now you're getting it for 5 or 6 and you're complaining. Just, I don't think they're real. I think they just watch YouTube all day. And
I think it's like the DSLR thing, isn't it? It's like, it's because DSLRs now are so good that if you are making a camera that costs 3 times the price, you better tell me what makes it worthwhile. And those things that those DSLRs do, and that gap between that cinema camera and that DSLR is getting even smaller now, to the point that it's like, well, soon some of the Sony cameras now, this like the standard, some of the ones that are Netflix approved are DSLRs, right? You can shoot on a DSLR, it's Netflix approved now. So it's like, if you're going to be jumping up in price, then it's going to need to wow me somewhere. It's going to need to do some kind of magical thing that you can throw at me in advertising to tell me why I need to pay 6 grand rather than 3.
But you know what? That's interesting, because I think what we're coming back to, and again, we're going to probably come back to this in a future episode. The thing that I think is interesting is how we move back to can you bring this camera on set now? And that, it was only a thing at the very high end.
Yeah.
Like, it was only a thing where
stunts or something like that.
Yeah, no one would complain. If you talk to production, obviously they rent the camera in most of the time. This is 2013, I'm talking 2013. You rent the camera in because they're so expensive. Or if you're a DP and you have your own red, great. But it wasn't like people were saying, I'm not going to hire you unless, if you were good, you were good.
Yeah.
Now we get to a point where it's like, you could be good, but now people want you to have a Sony or a Red or whatever. Mainly those two. I'd always argue that.
Or an Alexa. Alexa, all, but
yeah, I mean that's its own thing. Yeah, like that's the thing. That's its own thing. I'd say Alexa still is over there.
Yeah,
but like definitely on the mid end, it seems people react more to, or you have a Sony, and to my mind, Sony's reliable and is great, but it blows my mind because it's like there's some instances where there's better things and people just trust the brand name and they don't really know why. I know for stuff in TV, they have a workflow set with time code, all this kind of stuff. I get all that, and their workflow is based on speed. But when you're seeing people in like the low end saying FX6 only or FS whatever only, and it's like, huh?
Yeah,
it shouldn't matter. It's just an image. Maybe it's color grading workflow or whatever, but there's instances now, and again, this is marketing, because we have to hold the industry to account, because we can't just let them mail it in because they now have a great market share. Because every production has Sony, everybody buys a Sony. So if you don't have a Sony, people almost look at you like it's a strange thing, which is insane. It's insane to me, because Sony were not seen as a cinematic camera. I'd even argue the F55 wasn't really seen that way. I know they use a lot of Netflix stuff, but you weren't seeing a lot for a lot of music videos or short films or anything like that. It was like, oh, they were shooting a BBC drama, whatever. But you never see an F5 asked for specifically on a job. And the FS7 maybe, even though they were lower end because of but that was because loads of people bought it. So then everybody used it, and so then it became, you have to have it. It's like, there's better options out there. There's better options out there, but you're telling me I have to use this now because it's popular. And it's just crazy how it's went that way, because again, it's so accessible. I think it's, again, I could write a dissertation about this, but it's just interesting how we've come back on ourselves about it. And it'll be interesting to see what the next disruptive thing is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably, that's almost a good place to kind of tie it up, because I know that the next thing that we're going to talk about, like the next step in my journey when it came to camera, is is obviously such a big one, and I know we've got a lot to talk about with that, because that camera that I got after my Red really did feel like it was thinking about all the ways I was going to use this, and it was trying to be a camera that could cater for all of those uses. And it's probably my favorite camera up to date, and I think we got a lot to say about those cameras.
Well, we have got a lot to say about that company when we get there.
Yeah.
But we're gonna wrap it up here now, because I think we've gone on long enough for our first pod.
Yeah.
You guys still listening now? Thank you for listening. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we go forward, tech is going to be a big thing that we talk about, and new technology is always coming out. So, and we're always trying new tech out and stuff. So definitely, I think, keep coming back if you're interested in tech, film tech, because we're definitely interested in talking about it and using it.
100%. So guys, thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you on the other side. Peace out.